so now I want to have like a crazy viewing day of his weird ass operas.
And recital.
Yeah, Menotti every year.
I love it. Are we on?
Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to Music to My Ears on this fine Sunday afternoon. My name is Christa Durand, and
I am Rachel Steiner.
And we're here this afternoon to talk to you about our upcoming opera, The Old Maid and the Thief by Gian Carlo Menotti. Our opera here is going to run August 20th through 28th, and we are going to be on live stream with the possibility of a few in-person tickets depending on how life goes. You can find out more information at funmusiclessons.com/opera. So why are we doing this opera? It turns out I wasn't the only one in the country that had this idea. This particular opera was written for radio. And so as singers, producers, and other music people were all pretty down during COVID, we couldn't practice our craft. I was thinking, hey, what could we do even if we can't get together? This opera is for radio. Maybe we can all record it in our separate houses and put it together somehow. And then by the time we were done rehearsing, we're just ending up that we actually can all be in the same room together. So that's been really, really fun. And several other institutions, universities, and groups around the country have been doing it either live stream or as an actual radio opera where you just listen to it. Like this whole spring, there's probably been like 10 other productions that I've seen. So we're really excited to have art together again. We'll be presenting it as a non-staged version, so you'll be able to see us. We'll be in costume. We'll interact, but we won't be like running around a stage with sets, so it'll be kind of a half hybrid between listening to on the radio and actually getting to see us live.
No stage combat, I guess, for this
No
show.
stage combat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'll enjoy it anyway. And can I just say that I think after having read so much about Menotti and learning so much, I think if he were alive, he'd be very proud that it's being live streamed, that it's sort of a fusion between live and bringing it to people's homes. With or without a pandemic, I honestly think that he'd be like, yeah, you know,
exactly.
Don't want to put words in his mouth, but I get the feeling that he would be all for it.
He would, like, just as we get into our talk, you know, he is going to be at the forefront of his time for using technology to expose regular everyday people to opera. So I think you're right.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's worth mentioning that, you know, opera has a tradition of perhaps being a little bit of a privileged luxury item, you know, throughout the centuries. Something that not everybody gets a chance to access, right? Certainly in certain eras, that's absolutely true.
Yes.
Like you would never, you know, if you were not of a certain class, you would not be able to attend your local opera at the Royal Opera House or whatever. But
Right.
even now, it still sort of carries that legacy, you know. And so for a composer to really decide, like, I've got a lot of popularity, people like my stuff, and I'm also going to go way out of my way to make sure that I get some crossover audience, as we call them, like people who might not have been heading to the opera on a Saturday night to begin with. I'm going to try to really like fold them in, at least give them a chance to see what I'm about and all that stuff. So I think that's a real gift. That's a real legacy too.
I do, and I also feel like it goes back to some of his Italian roots, because in Italy, opera is more accessible.
Good call.
To the general public.
Yeah.
And so being originally from Italy and immigrating here, I feel like he carried that spirit that it was for everybody.
Right, yeah, and to maybe sort of take it off of that high shelf, you know, and sort of go, this is for people. Like, this is, let's make this accessible, let's make this, let's also maybe make some of it something that people have a high chance of liking, and we'll get into that as well.
Yes.
Because some, there is art music for everyone, but some of it is a little more whether or not you have a ticket or can afford a ticket or get access to it, some of it is a little more immediately likable than others, I would say. So, so I think he one thing he did is make a high percentage of his stuff in English, because he considered himself an American composer, even though he wasn't born here. He was a dual citizen. We should probably start at the beginning of his life. I'm getting ahead of myself. But he's like, let's write stuff for the people in their language. Let them hear the words themselves and not just assume everything has to be in Italian and German.
Right.
Okay, well, let's start from the very beginning. He was born in Italy in a small town, and kind of sounded like a middle class, upper middle class musical family. Definitely had a lot of access to, little living room get-togethers and stuff at an early age. And he wrote his first music at the age of 5, which is pretty notable. And it also, as a lifelong Mozart devotee myself, it gave me a lot of Mozart biography flashbacks. He wrote his first opera when he was 11. That's right on par with, I think Mozart was 11 or 12. But Mozart died in his 30s. Gian Carlo Menotti died at the age of 95. And as far as we can tell, he was writing things up until the end. So this man had 90 years of composition time.
Yep.
That is, maybe somebody's had a longer career. We were saying perhaps Aaron Copland, but that has got to be one of the top longest compositional careers throughout the most number of decades. That's really kind of stunning. And we found a lot of stunning facts about his life. I mean, a lot of it was like, wait, what?
It's also a lot of change. So think about the technological changes that 90-year span saw.
Yes.
Because he's writing in the 30s, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
I mean,
so that's
just
a
lot.
This huge swath of
Right.
technological change.
Right.
Through wars. A lot of his stuff is commentary on what's actually happening, and we actually see that change as the decades go on. His style, it's always quintessentially him, but it changes to reflect culture.
Wasn't afraid to, very much not afraid to change with the times. I mean, probably, if anything, afraid to get stuck.
Yes.
Sometimes
he was too ahead of himself.
Right, exactly. And so I think that's amazing. I mean, think of it, he was born, I guess, what year? Before World War I believe, right? 1911 or something like that. So that is an enormous. We were just joking that if he was alive today, I think he'd be writing like TikTok operas. Like, honestly,
yes.
I mean, I think he would be like,
wait a
30
second, seconds long.
I swear, I am projecting completely, but I really think that it seemed like whatever generation he was in, he was like, well, let's get on the forefront of that.
Yes.
And reach the most people.
And you're right. It's 1911, and he died in 2007.
It's tremendous. Okay, so let's go. I'm gonna flip through some of this stuff. He emigrated to the United States and immediately went to the Curtis Institute and started studying composition, although he did do some music school in Italy as well. I believe he was at the Verdi Institute. Hold on.
And he was saying too that when he first came to the Curtis Institute, he spoke almost no English.
Right.
And so, he said a lot of people didn't want to take the time to deal with him, so he would go to the movies. He said, that's where I learned my English. I would go to the movies, sometimes several movies in one day if I had time, and just absorb all the English that I could.
Amazing. And that also seems kind of it seems to fit the whole picture. Like, the movies brought me English. You know what I mean? Like, it's so fascinating. Let's see. He was 6 of 8 children. Number 6, prosperous merchant family. He wrote songs when he was 5, and then by 11 he had written a whole opera.
And is that the Death of Perrault?
Yes. And he performed it as a puppet show at home, which I think is amazing.
He said that in it, everyone died. So he said not one character was left alive by the end of the opera.
Very Italian. Italian.
Yes.
It's very, very like, you know, there's been some comparisons to Puccini,
Yes.
and that can be in there too, I think. So they moved to Milan. He went to the Verdi Conservatory of Music, and I know I read somewhere here he went to La Scala, you know, just more than probably most people living in Italy. Actually attended a lot of shows, had an intimacy with that. Entered the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. He had an introductory letter from Arturo Toscanini's wife, who Toscanini was like a very iconic conductor and director of that generation.
Very famous.
Yeah, and so that was probably worth quite a bit. And his composition professor, Rosario Scalero, said he was very talented, but needed some more discipline, needed like kind of, you know, a regime of like counterpoint, music theory, and all those sort of, for those of you who are not musicians, just sort of that
traditional.
Yeah, it's like the grammar of like if you were learning a language, it's like the rules and all that stuff. But and so he kind of needed some help with that, and got a lot of that, and early music as well. And at Curtis, at that young age, he met Samuel Barber, who also who became his partner, his romantic partner, also a collaborative partner, and is iconic in his own right as a composer, which that was a big surprise for us as well, because if two composers of that caliber and that sort of legendary status were married to each other now, it would be they'd be in the tabloids and stuff and everything. I mean, they would just be like, they'd be the power couple. They'd have a name with both of their, you know, portmanteau of both their names, and they would be like legendary. And we were like, wait, Barber and Menotti were, I didn't know that. Like, we didn't know.
We didn't learn it in school.
No.
I found out when I was 33, I think.
And
and I was like, blew my mind.
And so I think perhaps it had been a little bit sort of whitewashed out of some of the books that because we had really hip professors too. It wasn't for lack of, we both went to school together and we had very cool professors. I hope you're watching, any of you right now, but very like forward. I think perhaps this got just sort of gently whitewashed over in some of in
our textbooks.
Yeah. So that by itself is very, very, very notable. And they collaborated, which is like, it's enough that if two icons are married or whatever, but to be collaborating together. Menotti wrote a lot of the libretti for Barber, and for if that word is out of left field, that's basically the libretto of an opera is just all the words. It's basically if you take all the words and write them out like they're a play. That's what that is. So sometimes somebody writes a book and then it gets turned into a libretto, and you know the librettist and the composer collaborate to make that work. And so he did a lot of the libretti for Barber's music, which is notable in and of itself.
Especially since he was not a native English speaker.
Yeah, good call. Yeah. I mean, and didn't come over here at a super early age. Came over as like a young adult or 17. That's like, definitely a very talented man.
And also Samuel Barber got him out of some hot water a time or two. So I'm going to talk about some of his operas later, but when he was writing one of his operas, he had a deadline, and Samuel Barber just helped him finish out a bunch of the music like the week before, because it wasn't even like close to done.
That's amazing. Yeah. And that seemed to be a little bit of a characteristic we were getting of a compare and contrast of their two work styles.
Yes. So that Samuel Barber's work style was very structured. Like, I get up, I have breakfast, I write for 3 hours, I have lunch, I go for a walk, I write for 5 hours, I go to bed. And Menotti was just writing all the time. He was writing anytime he wasn't doing something else. And then he also said that he always had an extremely hard time sleeping his entire life because he would just keep composing in his brain all night long. So you know, they were...
This is also very Mozart-like.
Yes.
In my opinion. Like, it's not every brilliant composer, I think, has that brain that's just sort of spewing out stuff. I think they're all kind of different, you know?
Yes.
And I know Tchaikovsky was very open. He's like, yeah, I'm good. You know, don't get me wrong. I'm good, but I'm not Mozart. Like, it doesn't just pour out of me. I have to, he said something about you can see the seams if you look closely. I'm not like a Mozart. Like, he was very open, like, I have to work at it. Like, it doesn't just pour out. And I'm just getting the impression that perhaps Menotti might have had a brain a little bit more like Mozart's, where it just sort of, it appears. And, you know.
Yes, and also said that he was also very gregarious and charming and likable and very extroverted.
Yeah.
Whereas Samuel Barber was a little bit more introverted, and, you know, close friends of theirs say that they both kind of wish that they had the characteristics of the other person. Samuel Barber is always considered a very serious composer. He's taken very seriously.
Right. Yeah.
Menotti had a lot of fame at the time, worldwide fame, but there was never like seriousness about it. His you'll hear it if you look at publications or interviews from the time, that people often call his operas music dramas or like theatrical opera. Like, they always add this little adjective that makes it like not serious.
Not quite opera.
Yes.
Except it definitely was all the way opera. I mean, it still is.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah.
You have to sing it in an operatic style.
Yeah.
So one thing that makes an opera by just traditional standards is that it's sung all the way through. And so his operas are sung all the way through, instead of like having a singing part and then like a speaking part, like a musical, or what we call like an operetta, which is somewhere between a full opera and a musical. It has speaking and singing, but doesn't need to be like sung so powerfully. So they always kind of wanted what the other one had in terms of recognition and personality.
Yeah, and when I think of Barber, I mean, I'm not an expert on Barber by any means, but I've sung a little bit of it, and I think of Adagio for strings, you know, and
I love that piece.
Me too. But, I mean, it's there's nothing fluffy about it. Certainly, not that I think that's, again, not that there's necessarily anything fluffy about Menotti, but I think that's the sort of ethos the sort of thing that gets pinned on him. But definitely Barber did not have any of that pinned on him at all.
Right.
And you know, Vanessa was a groundbreaking opera, and Menotti wrote the libretto of that too. So it is really interesting how they sort of not just were companions romantically, but they really they were in each other's work lives too. And I think that alone, even if you want to whitewash LGBT history, which I don't recommend, and I wish that wasn't happening, even it's like you've got to look at how they affected each other's work too. Even if you don't want to talk about the LGBT history, which again, we should.
Right.
But,
yeah, they were together, working and living together for 40 years. And they did end up splitting up and not living together for a while, but Menotti was there at the end of Samuel Barber's life and did help care for him until his death. So they stayed friends.
And that's pretty amazing. Okay, so another thing that I just learned so much about this. He won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for music. One for The Consul, which is just an incredible opera on its own and very timely.
I want to do that next.
Yeah. It's it has a lot to say about red tape for immigration and people sort of being hung out to dry while they're waiting for their papers to go through. Sounds pretty timely to me. It was more of a European backdrop with Cold War type stuff, and I guess and totalitarian.
The Second World War.
Yeah, but boy, I mean, there's a theme that hasn't faded out of sight. It's still very timely. And then also for The Saint of Bleecker Street. So 2 Pulitzers for music. That's really, I mean, it's almost just one of those things. Again, we're going to go back to the fact that here's what we were told as singers. And we're still told sometimes there are certain things you're not allowed to do as an opera singer. Even if you're like a very forward sort of looking, you know, even if you're ready to take chances with your music and everything, there's certain things you're not supposed to do. And some of them are really small and don't have a lot to do with music, like wearing certain things to auditions.
Right.
Or, just there are these conventions that are just like...
if you're a soprano, don't wear pants to auditions.
Not even a nice pantsuit. Do not wear a Chanel pantsuit to an audition.
Nope.
Now that's getting people are pushing back on that because people are like, hey, did you know it's the 21st century and women wear pants? Like,
Yes.
But this is how we were sort of taught. And it's like, and nobody's endorsing these ideas. They're just saying, this is how it is. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to kind of know the secret handshakes on all these things.
Don't show your arms.
Don't show your arms, and sorry. Certain little conventions. And then there's certain things that you put on your resume, certain things you leave off of your resume, certain language you don't use. And then so for opera singers like ourselves, we have an audition package. We have maybe 5 different arias that are our best. They're contrasting, hopefully in different languages from different composers and time periods. And all I really knew about Menotti is don't put him in your audition package.
Right. You said you hadn't even heard any of his music.
No.
And you knew that you shouldn't put it on your audition list.
I knew nothing about him except he was kind of American, kind of Italian, had some music that people really liked, but I shouldn't sing any of it in any sort of an audition setting or like an adjudicated recital.
Because you wouldn't be taken seriously.
Right. And it was like, it didn't even matter what my professors necessarily felt about it. It's just, we don't do this.
Yep.
It's just, it's larger than the school I'm at. It's larger than any of that. And
Right.
I was like, okay. And it was sort of like, why? And I still don't know that I have a real clear answer to that.
Right? I mean, that's what we were discussing. We were like, let's think about why this might be. Rachel and I both belong to this online opera singer forum that has everyone from like undergrads through to like really well-known professionals that sing the world over. And we kind of all support and give each other suggestions. And 2 months ago, someone wrote, I'm getting ready for this audition. My teacher said, don't put this Menotti piece on your audition list, even though I think I sing it really, really well. And they said, don't do it. And so they were getting the opinion of working professionals on whether that was legit, whether they should push back. I think most of the advice now from everyone that is more like our generation and below is push back. If you sing that well, sing it. No one has a good reason why his music cannot be taken seriously.
Right. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so, by the time I had heard Monica's Waltz, which is from
The Medium.
And I had heard of it. Like, should I use it? Should I not use it? Should I, and by the way, I'm just going to say this. I grew up in a household that watched operas on the TV all the time, like had very early adopters of VHS, live from the Met. I grew up like watching operas and operettas for fun. That I was in that family, and God bless them, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
But I never saw any Menotti in that either. It wasn't on Live from the Met. And by the time we were at a recital together, I believe, and somebody sang Monica's Waltz, I went, oh, how does that go again? I know I've heard of that so many times, and people always talk about how they're sick of it. And then by the time I heard it, I was like, I've never heard this. I don't know it. I've never heard anyone sing this before.
It was just the zeitgeist that we should be sick of it.
Exactly. And I had never heard the notes in my life. So it's become this interesting, weird lightning rod that, and I think other industries have these too. Oh, we've all decided we're sick of this thing. I know the food industry sometimes, we're all tired of scallops this year or whatever. Like things get hackneyed and trite, and then everybody decides that they're tired of it.
Right.
All the cool people decide that it's canceled now.
Right.
But this has been going on for decades, and I think it's really, in my opinion, would be, and the other thing I was going to say is that we opera singers are always, well, some of us at least, are always sort of struggling to find good, solid opera arias that are in English.
Yes.
Because a lot of people would like to hear an aria in English, and they would like something that was written in English, not take something from Don Giovanni and translate it into, which is fine too, but they want something that the language that it was written in is English, and it's not always easy to find something.
No, and because I feel like we're returning to that, that people are starting to shift again, that
Yes.
that the average everyday American should have access to opera, and so that's why they're asking for more English, and also trying to encourage people to sing these pieces so that the composers get more well known, and people want to hear them, want to listen to them, want to commission pieces from them.
Right. Yeah.
So it's funny that we're like moving in this direction, and yet, like in academia, still being told like don't do it.
Right. Yeah. There was one comment on the board that I saw. It literally said something like, "I think we're just waiting for all the Menotti's haters to retire, you know, at this point, so that the rest of us can just." It almost feels like, and I don't know if that's true, but it's like something from the past that needs to just sort of go.
Yes.
This sort of irrational hatred. So it's interesting because I find his music really beautiful.
Yes.
And I'm like, wait, this is great.
And me, always being the rebel back in that day,
Yes.
I always had "Steal Me, Sweet Thief" from the Old Maid and the Thief. So you'll hear it in
Gorgeous.
August on my audition packet that I auditioned with all the time. 'Cause I sang it well. People never complained.
Right. Come see the show just for that aria. I swear.
Right?
Like, it's so beautiful.
It is gorgeous.
It's just, it's like a beautiful, I want to say Puccini. I don't know. It feels like a beautiful common practice period, gorgeous love aria. You know, it's really beautiful.
It's grand.
It's worth the price of admission for sure. Yeah. Well, let me just sort of finish off his amazing life here. And he wrote not only the libretto for Vanessa by Samuel Barber, but also the stage direction.
Oh yes, stage direction was a big thing for him.
Yeah, very, had his fingers in all the pots. I mean, really liked to be designing as many aspects of the work as he could, it seems like.
Well, it was. Oh, sorry
No,
to
go
interrupt.
ahead.
I said stage direction. So, so when he was first starting out, they did a lot of his shows were kind of like cobbled together with like friends and stuff. But as he gained popularity, he would like branch out and be like, "Oh, maybe this time I'll get a real producer." And then that person wouldn't leave the new opera open long enough for people to want to go see it,
Right.
because they were used to hits right off the bat.
Right.
Or like, I'm gonna get a real stage director, like someone people know about, and then he would fire them because he was like, "You ruined my opera." So he ended up, flying around the world later in life when he got more notoriety, flying around the world constantly to do the stage direction on his operas because he didn't think other people did them well enough.
I mean, if you got it, I love that he had this really 90 years of being able and having, if I was that famous and iconic, I'm pretty sure I would be delegating a lot of things and just taking a nap instead.
Right.
But he really had the energy and the drive to be like, "No, I'll do the stage direction. No." I'm pretty sure he'd do the costumes if he could, so and now we have that legacy.
Yes.
We have all those stage directions for all that stuff. And it's pretty cool. So definitely long career, and it seems like he really made the most of it. He wrote the libretto to Barber's Hand of Bridge, which was one of my first things. I was in a show with a bunch of different short operas when I was a little baby opera singer. I think I was like 15. And I remember that one very well. It's the words are great. The music is great. Let's see here. He and Barber lived in a house in New York for a long time. It was called Capricorn. It had a name. I love that. And but then later in life, and apparently when he was not, he may have still been close to Barber as a friend, but they weren't a couple anymore. He ended up in Edinburgh and ended up in buying a 16th century manor, which I think is yeah, I'll do that when I'm in my 90s too. That sounds really fun. He adopted a son in the 70s, which is also, I think, amazing, because clearly right now there's still controversy about non-straight people and adoption. So that must have been really amazing in the 70s to have that happen. He spawned several festivals, several major music festivals. Let's see.
I think he was not necessarily always wanting to be as involved in the festivals. Like, he sort of like, it's taking too much of my time, you know?
Yeah.
But I also want everything a certain way.
Yes, that, and apparently he was really involved in trying to help up-and-coming people get their big breaks. So,
Yeah.
you know, he had this balance, meaning he wanted to use, like, famous singers so that, you know, people would come see them and see his operas, but he also wanted to use non-famous singers, like young singers, young dancers, young
Yes.
conductors. And those festivals were this opportunity for him, even though he was like, well, this is not my music necessarily, to invite some of these young people that he met around the world to come get their big breaks. So it was kind of like this mentorship, you know, hey, I met you in Australia, you're a great cellist, let's bring you in and play Bach.
Right, yeah.
But you're amazing, and people will see you.
I have a quote for that. He said, I'm asked, why don't you invite famous performers? And I say, we don't need them. Why spend all the money for the sacred monsters that will give us no time for rehearsals, that's real talk, and will only sing the usual repertoire? Let us do it with young people. We'll create our stars. So I think that that's really, and clearly, the more quotes I hear from him, the more he seemed to be someone of real talk, who didn't want to be like polite and nibble around the edges. He's like, sacred monsters, I'll spend money on the sacred monsters. I mean, that probably made a couple
Ruffled
people
some feathers.
Yeah, it probably made a little bit of grump, you know. But I think that that's interesting, and you know, I mean, it's real talk, and I think he did a lot to bring more people into this, the macro, you know, in terms of performers, in terms of listeners, in terms of whoever. He did several of his operas on Broadway instead of, there's a quote here somewhere, and I'll try to see if I can find it, but he said something about trying to break up the power of like the Metropolitan Opera and La Scala, like wanting to not just have everything, you know, all the influential opera of note happen at this one place, and this one place, and this one place. Like, let's do it on Broadway. Let's do it over here. Let's do it on TV. You know, and so that again, that probably ticked some people off.
Yes,
I would be willing to bet a lot of money that ticked some people off, right? So and I wish I could find that quote, but it was really.
If you want to look for it, I have more to say about the whole Broadway thing. So. His first opera that was produced on Broadway was called The Medium, and it's about this psychic who is not really psychic. She has a daughter and has an adopted deaf son, well, deaf and mute. He doesn't hear or speak, and she dresses them up as ghosts, and they like. Basically are con artists together for people who are seeking a psychic. But during the opera, she starts actually seeing real ghosts and goes crazy. So it's very dark. It's very dark and dramatic. And he said, let's produce this on Broadway. And so he had some acquaintances that believed in him enough to front the $30,000 that it cost to open the show on Broadway, and that was in 1947.
That's a lot of money.
He was so excited that he got a hotel room across the street at the Edison Hotel, so he could watch people buy tickets from the box office.
Oh my gosh!
And no one bought any tickets. And they played the show, though, to their credit, to empty houses for like a week. And then the producers were trying to brainstorm, because they weren't like, say, legit producers, right? Yeah. But they believed in him. So they were trying to brainstorm like how they could get people to come to this unknown thing from this unknown person. And one of them, I forget if he knew it or it was a friend, knew Toscanini, who we mentioned earlier, who was like the premier conductor of the day, extremely famous.
Iconic.
And that person knew that if you told him to do something, he would do the opposite. So I was listening to the interview, and he said, so I called him up, and I said, I know you won't come, but I'm inviting you to an opera. And Toscanini said, how dare you tell me what I will
Tell
and
me
will
what-
not do? I'm coming.
That is
And
amazing.
so he went and he adored it and
Mm.
told everyone, and for the rest of the run they packed houses.
I love that.
So then the next opera that he tried to produce on Broadway, he got a real producer, like I mentioned earlier, because it was successful. And the guy, it was the consul. And so that is the one that we mentioned earlier that is about refugees. They are stuck between countries. They can't go back to their old country or they will be killed. And they cannot go back to a new country because they need a certain amount of paperwork and it all has to be done. And it's just about like bureaucratic coldness and just being stuck. And so no one was coming. And so the producer, after 3 shows, canceled it. And then he realized that, you know, Menotti needed to work with people that really believed in him and also knew how operas work. He was like, I realized that Broadway works a little bit differently. You create all of this hype and people come and it's exciting.
Right.
But he's like, most often if you're doing a new opera, it takes a bit of time. Like people need to see it trickle in, they tell other people, and then it fills up. So he went back with his old partners and they reopened it. And in one of the interviews, one of the producers was sitting next to Toscanini at that one, and there's this aria at the end where this woman has been trying to get her papers the whole time, and her whole family dies in the meantime as she's trying to get them, and it finally gets granted to her, and she sings this aria about how sad she is that this has been the process, and it said that Toscanini cried every time he saw it.
That's something. Can you imagine making Toscanini cry?
Right?
I mean,
I don't think he probably cried out a lot.
he's probably conducted every beautiful work imaginable with the best stars of the day. That is something.
Yeah.
I think it would. I think he's seen a lot. That would be amazing to be able to do that.
Right. And both of these are serious, powerful works of drama.
Right.
Sung through with
big
difficult
orchestras,
music.
right? The console. Some of his operas are what's called chamber operas, where there's fewer instrumental musicians, fewer singers, smaller production maybe, and so sometimes that can be something where people, well, you're not a real opera, because this is so small, which is silly
grand.
anyway. Yeah,
It's not grand
right.
opera.
It's not. There's no acrobats or whatever. There's no like giant, not acrobats, but it's not the kind of like giant Verdi Aida type thing. But the console is a full scale.
Yes.
So again, that's sort of this is us sharing our process of like, well, is it this? Is this why they don't take Menotti seriously? No, it can't be that. Could it be this? No, that doesn't make sense either. And we never did really necessarily find the thing.
No.
It's still kind of a mystery.
Because he seemed like he was a decent person.
Right.
Interviews with people that he's worked with, famous people and non-famous people, all gush about him.
Right.
That they
Very
loved
popular.
working with
Like
him.
people, he did. I mean, we're sharing some stories of some things getting a hard time getting traction, but really a lot of his stuff were big hits in his lifetime.
Yeah.
And I found the quote. Again, I'm sure this didn't go over that well. It is in America that I started my experiment of trying to take the opera away from the sacred barns like the Metropolitan and La Scala. Sacred barns. I doubt that. I mean, that would tick people off today.
Yes, it would.
I mean, if
He'd be,
Jake
like,
Peggy
blacklisted.
said that and said, "No, I'm not doing that," you know what I mean? Like that would. So it does kind of give a little context for perhaps why the intelligentsia were like, like we're getting a little bit of like. We're being like sleuths about this. We're trying to figure it out. And I'm like, okay. He did, as time went on, he wrote an anti-war opera,
Yes.
right? That also probably was controversial. Like, what else?
He wrote anti-capitalist opera. It was both anti-capitalist and also how the West exploits certain countries, certain like poorer countries to their benefit. That one was a big flop.
See, and then apparently one called, I believe, The Leper, and I haven't listened to it, but it was a fairly thinly veiled, if at all, statement against homophobia. And that was like in the 70s, I think. So may not have been ready for that in the sort of like, you know, powdered opera circles of the time.
Right.
You know, I mean, I'm sure some people were ready for that, but again, it's like, are those people coming? Do those people have access to your work? The people who are ready for an anti, you know, homophobia opera, how do we get them in? You know what I mean? So it all kind of works together, and I think it's just so interesting. It's almost like he had just an essential philosophy that perhaps didn't match the various eras. Maybe some of them. Maybe it did match in the 70s. You know, I don't know. But like that, his philosophy kind of went against the sort of
mainstream.
Macro. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and
Interesting.
and also gentle criticism of some things that are happening in each
Right.
decade, you know, politically.
Right.
That like
What are like? Excuse me.
yes.
You know?
Well, and then to marry that with the technology. So
Yes.
he was always pushing forefront of presenting opera with technology. He had The Old Maid and the Thief, which was an opera for radio. It was commissioned by NBC, and then for their radio program. But then when television came along, he was commissioned for Amal and the Night Visitors. It was the first opera for TV ever, and it was actually the first thing that was ever shown on the newly created Hallmark Channel.
What? I didn't know that. Oh my gosh.
Right? So that was the original Hallmark movie.
That's amazing. Yeah, we should talk about Amal a little bit too, because that has definitely, you know, that has been maybe the most consistent hit of, you know,
all of his work. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of biblical type story. It's performed a lot around Christmas time. It's it centers around a poor boy with physical disabilities who wants to present his crutches as a gift to baby Jesus, I believe.
Yes.
And it has, you know, at the time of the writing of this article, they said it has been performed more than 2,500 times.
The Music to Mirrors did 2 of those.
Yes. Yes.
Done it twice.
Yeah, and I would guess that number was bigger then and bigger now, because I can think of productions too that I doubt that the New York Times ticked off on their little, you know, like small but legit productions. So that gets performed widely, and with sometimes with professionals and sometimes with high school kids, you know, and so that has really found a very, very strong niche in, you know, American tradition.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
you know.
I meet a lot of people that, and around 50 or 60 years old, that have really fond memories of watching that production.
Yeah.
As children and growing up. But that was also the one that Samuel Barber helped him finish the music for last minute.
Oh my God.
Yes. Because he was on the deadline. So that was for TV. And then after that, the opera that I mentioned before that was kind of anti-capitalist, he started trying to push it even further and using projections at the time. So this was like in the 50s, so projection technology is not like what it is now, and it's so ironic because if you go to big houses like San Francisco, they're using so many projections now for scenes, set changes, like everything.
Sort of augmented stage reality.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, it's,
like projecting a scene outside of a window. And Menotti's experimenting with that in the 50s, but it's getting like bad reviews. People are saying, you know, what are you doing? What are you trying to like have us in?
Yeah.
And then he also continues to film operas and have operas be like for TV or film, but they weren't as popular. I watched some of them getting ready for this, and they are pretty out there psychologically, although that was also kind of in the composing zeitgeist at the time, and there were several composers in the 70s who were doing these like psychological operas where, you know, everything was taking place in the mind of the singer, or Bluebeard's Castle takes place with 2 characters, and then there's like doors, and they open the doors and describe what's in them, but you never get to see it. And
terrifying.
yes, so Menotti was definitely going into that,
Yeah.
and also he started getting a
Headspace.
little bit more minimalist about his style of writing. It wasn't quite as like lush, so it got pretty heady and academic.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that is another sort of juxtaposition too, because I feel like a lot of what's been held against him is the fact that, and this is a little bit of a, fast and dirty music history, but opera and a lot of music in general had a lot of very beautiful soaring melodies for hundreds of years.
Yep.
And then somewhere around World War I-ish, people kind of burned that down, and that's okay. Music became, how do I describe dissonance? Music became a lot more dissonant in around the teens and the 20s and thereafter. And that became sort of the predominant intellectual music style, is things that don't sound necessarily what most people would call pretty.
Or that you can come away like being able to humming a melody.
Yeah. And Richard B. Evans, who is an amazing icon in his own right, a local treasure and a composer. I don't want to misquote him because we had this conversation like 3 years ago, but he said something to me along the lines of, well, at some point in our Western music history, opera sort of let go of the beautiful melodies, and then musical theater picked that up. And that's where it found a home. So that's where, if you want to hear gorgeous melodies, that musical theater becomes the place where you're more likely to find that. So, I think that Menotti was like, no. Cool, but I'm gonna still write these gorgeous, like Puccini, like melodies and sort of harmonies and stuff. And it's not like he doesn't use dissonance, but it's more of an accent point than sort of the whole thing, right? And so that was not what maybe the cool kids were doing at certain eras of his composition.
Exactly.
And I will say, and I don't have a preference of, I mean, I know which one's easier to sing for me, but I'm not like saying one is better than the other, but I will say I've had a lot of conversations with, I was just thinking of a conversation of my late father-in-law when I first met him. My husband is a singer as well, and my boyfriend, he was my boyfriend at the time, and I said, well, are you, Rich, are you going to come to my concert? I have a concert coming up. And he's like, well, it depends. Is it chamber music? And I went, no. What do you not like chamber music? Of course, what chamber music actually is like we've talked, is smaller, like fewer instrumentalists, fewer singers. It's a chamber choir is a smaller choir. A chamber ensemble might be like a string quartet rather than a whole orchestra. And I was kind of thinking, like, what's his beef with chamber music? Like, but what he had gotten the impression, he had seen a lot of concerts of my husband, Michael, and he was in these chamber concerts, and they happened to be highly dissonant.
Oh.
And and he thought that chamber music was stuff that was hard for him to listen to and sort of didn't taste good listening to it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and you know what? And for me, I think that needs to be acknowledged, that not everybody wants to, that if I play you 10 minutes of a Menotti opera, and then I play you 10 minutes of something that's highly dissonant, another opera, and I say, which one would you like to buy a ticket and go see? I think whatever you as the listener decide is legit, and I don't think anyone needs to look down their nose at that. I think that, like, if you like things that are very, very harmonic and beautiful, then you should buy a ticket and go see that.
Yes.
If you like things where they're not, you should buy a ticket and go see that. And and so that's where I think that's one of the big takeaways, I think, for me, is that Menotti was doing something that was maybe felt to be passé at that time, and he's like, actually, I really want those beautiful melodies. I want to use dissonance and sort of edgy harmonies sometimes, but less than you guys are doing right
They
now.
usually have a dramatic reason for him creating those dissonances, like in the opera The Old Maid and Thief that we'll be doing in August. scenes that are everyday life or strong emotion are very beautiful and melodic.
Yeah.
But there are some scenes where people are doing like really bad things, or there's a scene where people are stealing from a liquor store, and those scenes are really edgy. They just have like 5 notes that don't go together like constantly,
Right.
but it's for dramatic impact.
It feels appropriate at that moment rather than and again, I know folks who don't have degrees in music and they really do love high levels of dissonance and some stuff. That is some people's jam, but I think that having a more pluralistic view of it in retrospect, I think that could be part of the stigma, which is sort of like the overarching mystery of our talk. What is with the stigma? And that may have been part of it, There was some quote that I heard, I don't have it written down, but they were like, some critic of the time was like, well, I don't know if anybody's going to be performing this in 50 years, which is kind of funny. I think it was like in the 40s or something, like kind of early in his career. And they're like, I mean, are you really going to want to listen to this or Puccini? And it was like, okay, well, so if you want to write like, very harmonic, like soaring melodies, do you have to like be better than Puccini?
Right.
Or, that's
a pretty both.
Right. It's a pretty tough, like that's a pretty tall order. Yeah, exactly. I would prefer we can have all of the things, So, anyway.
But on the good side is, so many people die poor or unknown in their lifetime and don't really get to see the impact. I mean, he was popular, he was winning grants, awards, prizes. He didn't die a very wealthy person. I think mostly because he insisted on flying around the world to direct all of his operas. But he knew, I hope he knew inside, but because outside he succeeded. Yeah. He got the Kennedy Center Medal.
Yes, huge. I mean, 2 Pulitzers. I am embarrassed how long it took me I didn't know until not that long ago there was a Pulitzer in music at all.
Right.
And I was like, how did I miss that? But to win 2 of those, that's really something.
Yes.
I mean, to win 2 of those in anything, for anyone, that's really a lot. One of them is a lot. So, I mean, that's really amazing. So, yeah, exactly. And I do think it's also a triumph in a sort of from an LGBT perspective to have a lot of success. And, I don't know if they were completely out, but they certainly weren't in the closet either, I guess.
Yeah.
Quite.
It didn't seem like it.
That made a lot of room for probably a lot of not straight composers and musicians to come after. Whether or not it really got the history book recognition, I mean, that still really puts a mark. That a legacy for people. Well, maybe I can be gay and a composer too.
Yes.
So that's a real legacy as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think he knew, at least externally, that he was successful, that his works were being performed all over the world. He had so many people in his life that just thought the world of him. Like, I did a concert 2 years ago in Napa, and this person that I didn't know in the audience, as I sang a Menotti piece, came up and was like, I was one of his clerks. He was the best boss ever. He was the greatest human. I loved him. Just gushed. And when you look online and old interviews and everything, everyone is just gushing. They said, he believed in me. That's what you hear all the time. It's like, he believed in me and gave me these opportunities to be my best self. And so, I really hope that he could take that to heart, and his lifelong yearning to be taken seriously as a composer. Somehow he absorbed that before he died.
Yeah, that's, and I know he was very popular, even if, I mean, what did he say about critics? He said, I didn't quite understand this, but I thought it was, though critics often dismiss Mr. Menotti's music as maudlin and unadventurous. Guess it depends on who you ask, right? Many of them still celebrated his impressive lyric gifts, his deft touch with orchestral sound, and his talent for making opera comprehensible and enjoyable for people who had previously shunned it. Of critics, he once said, "They often spoil my breakfast, but never my lunch." Take that for what it's worth. But I like that. It's like, yeah, I read it, but, I let it go.
Yeah.
That's probably a healthy attitude for anyone in the art scene. That can be a lesson to all of us, too.
Yes, I love it. Anyway, so we hope that you will be able to join us for the opera. You can get tickets for the live stream, and then also it can get put on the list for maybe possibly seeing it in person.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. So again, August 20 through the 28th. So we have 6 shows total, 2 different casts. There's one cast one weekend that I'm in, and then there's another cast the second weekend. Lots of music to my ears teachers are in those casts.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's been really fun, a big joy to be able to sing with people again.
Humans.
And work with our fabulous pianist Christa Alexander and John Pavick. Oh my gosh.
Awesome.
Anyway, so thanks for tuning in with us here this afternoon. Thank you, Rachel. For
Thank you.
coming and talking about this.
Do it
with me.
again.
Yeah. And we'll see you in August.